Well, welcome to another episode of FishingLocalWaters.com. Today we're in Frankfort, Kentucky, and you can see the Capitol behind us. Now, the reason we're in Frankfort, Kentucky is about 3 weeks ago, a bill called SB89 landed on the governor's desk. And in that bill was some language that changed the definition of what is called the waters of the Commonwealth. In fact, what it did is it narrowed down what the waters of the Commonwealth would be. Therefore, it narrows down the authority having jurisdiction that the Energy and the Environmental Cabinet has on the headwaters, particularly the headwaters and wetlands associated with every major stream in Kentucky. And so obviously, this is an issue of concern. And it was an issue of concern for the governor, and that's why he vetoed it and sent it back down. But what happened is that bill was voted on, and it passed by a majority, and it became a law. Now, this bill is a coal bill, and it will be overseen by the Energy and Environmental Cabinet of Kentucky. What's interesting in Kentucky is that we have combined the Energy and the Environmental Cabinet together. Now, some states separate it, and many believe that that's what we should do in Kentucky, that the EPA portion of the cabinet should be its own cabinet, and the Energy Cabinet should be its own cabinet, separate cabinets. And not saying that we shouldn't mine coal. It's a natural resource in Kentucky, and let's mine it, but let's make sure we do it in a way that doesn't affect our other natural resources, such as our waterways. Now, what's also interesting is that over the years, the industry has figured out ways to circumvent the EPA and the environmental issues anyway. They set up organizations that can bankrupt and get out from underneath the issues associated with reclamation and any energies that may be issued either on a federal level or on a state level. And in this episode, we'll talk about that, and we'll actually show you how that's being done or has been done in the past. So thank you for joining us. We hope that you enjoy this episode of FishingLocalWaters.com. Welcome to another episode of FishingLocalWaters.com. Remember, if you're fishing, you're almost always fishing in someone's local waters. So when on private land, talk to the owners and ask permission. And always be courteous and good stewards whenever you're on private or public properties. As a reminder, if you haven't already, please subscribe below. It helps us and allows us to keep you informed. As always, we hope you enjoy this segment of FishingLocalWaters.com.
Adventures of the Shadow are on the air, brought to you each week by the Blue Coal Dealers of America. These dramatizations are designed to demonstrate forcibly to old and young alike that crime does not pay.
Many do not know that when Jimmy Hoffa went missing in 1975, that not only was he once the notorious president of the Teamsters Union with deep mafia connections, but he also had financial ties to the Blue Coal Company. And right before Jimmy Hoffa disappeared, Blue Coal was facing bankruptcy, and Jimmy had invested heavily in their predecessor, the Great American Coal Company. The FBI investigation that followed Jimmy Hoffa's disappearance found that James Harding, an associate of Hoffa, had recently been hired by Blue Coal to oversee security, and shortly after Hoffa disappeared, his lawyer met with Harding to discuss ways to protect Hoffa's interest in the Great American Coal Company. Jimmy Hoffa's investment in coal may surprise some, but it pales in comparison to the information uncovered after the 1959 Knox mine disaster.
Tomorrow marks the 65th anniversary of the Knox mine disaster in Luzerne County. Today, more than a dozen people braved the cold for an annual mass at St. John the Evangelist Church in Pittston, followed by a memorial wreath-laying ceremony and a walk to honor the victims and the heroes from the tragic day. 12 miners lost their lives that January day in 1959 after unauthorized mining under the Susquehanna River caused billions of gallons of water to flood the River Slope mine. More than 35 were saved. That disaster ended deep mining in the greater Pittston area. Organizers say it's important to remember the Knox mine disaster for many reasons.
It's a symbol of the industry at the end of its life, where it became rather corrupt and slipshod. And the Knox mine disaster was caused by illegal mining under the river by the Knox Coal Company. They had mined beyond state-certified stop lines because they were after easy coal.
81 men were down in the mine that day 65 years ago.
The union mine workers had been ordered to illegally dig under the river, which broke through the riverbed and into the mine shafts below. 12 miners would die in those tunnels as water rushed in from above. News reports of the day showed train cars being dumped into the massive whirlpool in a failed attempt to stop the breach. The 5 investigations that followed led to the arrest and convictions of several individuals, including August J. Lippi, who happened to be the president of the District 1 of the United Mine Workers of America. He also happened to be the president of the local bank, and at the same time it was discovered that he was one of the 4 primary owners of the Knox coal mine, which was in direct conflict with the 1935 National Labor Relation Act, which separated ownership and the union membership. Guss, as he was called, was eventually convicted of income tax evasion and bank fraud and served 41 months in prison. Though you do have to give Guss credit, by controlling the bank, he controlled the finance. By being an owner of the mine, he controlled the operations. And being the union president, he controlled the labor force.
You don't have to say you stand by your answer. Just tell me you want to take it. I'm not trying to put words into your mouth. But you're not just answering the way you want to answer either. I'll answer the way I want to answer.
The men behind coal companies are often thought to be old, elite, cigar-smoking coal barons sitting in dark paneled offices somewhere in Lexington, Kentucky, or Charleston, West Virginia, and thinking of ways to buy politicians, destroy nature, and screw the working class. In reality, coal mining is a 15-year, high-paced, high-tech commodity game with millions of dollars in transit at any given moment, using financial strategies that need to adapt to the whims of nature and a rapid changing business environment. This game is being implemented by various stakeholders, all seeking leverage to maximize benefits and reduce their risk, most often at the expense of the other stakeholders. After the 1959 Knox coal mine disaster, corruption and graft was found buried within the industry. Organized crime could be found within ownership and labor. This went on to manifest itself into the 1969 murder of the union leader Jock Yablonsky, his wife, and daughter, as discussed in episode 3 of this series. Jimmy Hoffa disappeared in 1975 with ties to organized crime and the coal industry, and then in 1982, a financial firm purchased Gibson greeting cards of Cincinnati, Ohio. The firm paid $80 million, but borrowed $79 million to make the acquisition. The transaction closed with only $1 million of equity invested, with the 2 partners each investing $330,000. 16 months later, the private equity firm took the company public in an IPO that was valued at $290 million. This meant the 2 partners realized a return of 200 times their invested capital, turning each partner's investment of $330,000 into $69 million within 16 months. This transaction instantaneously became legendary and was the start of the financial craze of private equity investments and these financial strategies quickly found their way into coal country. The get in and get out quick strategy of private equity and the dump and run strategy followed by bankruptcy align perfectly with the cash flow and life of a coal mine. In addition, these strategies allowed for the means and methods for outside investors to pocket the profits and quietly exit the room one by one and leave the cost of the environmental damage to the surrounding communities and future generations. Welcome to coal country. The financial players behind the curtain are a lot more diverse than it appears. The cast of characters include Russian oligarchs, state governors, senators, Chinese officials, brothers from India, advisors to the president, investment bankers, and private equity fund managers. In this episode, we examine the overlapping career of three well-known coal executives who were local boys and rose up through the ranks to participate in this ruthless, rough, tough, cutthroat business environment. Each used a different business strategy primarily established by the investors, money men, and financial systems behind the companies they represented. In communities where everyone knows everyone and many are kin, the critical eye of the community will have varying opinions to each man's character and whether or not they were successful. As an outsider, my opinion doesn't count regarding right, wrong, good, or evil. Their stories deserve more than the 10 minutes allotted in this episode. And our goal is to look at the financial strategies that led to massive environmental damages, rather than to condemn, praise, or pass judgment. One was a company man, furiously loyal and dedicated to the brand in which he rode. He played to protect the company he represented at all costs. One was well suited for the white knight strategy of riding in and saving distressed companies. And one loved the action, the chess game of leverage associated with private equity, and the fast pace of business dealings. Because the logistics of coal mining are similar and cash flow mandates that you get the coal out of the ground and to the end user as quickly as possible, they all use similar means and methods. But their personalities were different and complex, as were the financial structures that stood behind each man. To better understand these individuals, let us examine how a coal company might be structured in coal country. Although totally imaginary, perhaps it will give you some insight into the mechanics and challenges associated with the industry and how the companies are built to protect profits and collapse when threatened. Perhaps you will have a better understanding of how bankruptcies seem to be on the rise while some of the richest people of the world are still standing behind the curtains pulling the levers. Now assume that you are a young coal executive who came into ownership of 600 acres of some of West Virginia's prime Pocahontas No. 3 met coal. It has a seam of about 60 inches, and you figure that it will produce around 4.6 million tons that could be sold for around $150 per ton. The cost of production should be around $95 a ton, and that will allow for a net profit of $252.5 million. You figure it will take a year to open the mine and an additional 7.66 years to completely harvest the coal. Now you have already spent $2.4 million on the land, and you had to run down 73 heirs in order to get the title. One was in jail, 2 nobody talked about, and 3 no one knew about. But you finally got the agreement, and it was like herding cats to get there. Opening a new mine is expensive. Mining and running 4.5 million tons of abrasive carbon up conveyor belts and through a prep plant and onto train cars is going to require some large, heavy-duty, expensive equipment. You're hoping to finish the geological assessment, engineer the infrastructure, and set up 2 legal holding companies for another $2.5 million and build the infrastructure for $50 million. This means that the startup cost before the first ton of coal is recovered will be around $54.9 million, and funds are already beginning to run tight. Going to the bank at this particular time would be useless. Besides, a competing coal executive sits on the board of directors, and you're not wanting to share your plans until a few more pieces are put into place. So you fly to New York and pitch your proposal to a few firms that aren't afraid of coal companies. Private equity firms solicit investments from well-to-do individuals and entities who can afford to commit larger amounts of money for longer periods of time and can absorb the risk if necessary. The fund is managed by a general partner who by law must also have skin in the game. The firm is looking for investments in private projects such as yours. Investing money into projects, though, is always easy. They're looking at the end game and how much money they will have when the game is done. This is a smaller project and allows the private equity firm to get in and get out in 7 years. You are looking for $60 million to secure the startup loan for 4 years plus a staggered release of the 1-year construction loan. In addition, you want $15 million to cover cash flow for the operations of the mine for the 1-year startup and then 6 years of operations. With this commitment of equity, you plan to borrow money from the banks. Theoretically, if everything goes as planned, minimal money should ever leave the private equity fund. A private equity firm finds your project attractive and is willing to go forward. In fact, they even had an Italian buyer who was willing to pay $150 per ton and take everything you could produce. The coal would be shipped through the Hampton Roads port in Norfolk, Virginia, and the money will flow through a bank in Cyprus. If your numbers are correct, the projected income at the end of the term will be $540 million with a cost of $342 million. The limited partners will get $135.4 million. The general partner will get $31.5 million and you $31 million. You work out some additional details regarding compensation and bonuses if you serve as the mine operator and agreement is reached. You are now one step closer to getting this deal done, but you can't get the nagging thought out of your head that the coal might be going to a steel and arms manufacturer that supplies Russia. The private equity fund wants out in 7 years. With a year to open the mine, that means you have 6 years to run coal, and then the mine goes up for sale. That is, if all hell doesn't break loose first. With the agreement struck, you and the private equity firm create a holding company. We didn't name your mine, it's your mine. You name it anything you want. Now it's time to talk to the bank about borrowing $54.9 million for the construction loan. It's padded for contingency and to recoup the money that you paid for the land purchase. One bank alone will not carry the original startup cost of $54.5 million. They will spread the cost and risk across 2 or 3 other banks. This is called a bank syndicate. They know you padded the numbers, but with the private equity firm in the room, they also know that you likely have other lending options. And with you already owning the land, the project cannot be stolen. So they announce that they will write the deal if the private equity sponsors loan guarantees. Now this was already foreseen and expected, so the paperwork is drawn up and the deal is closed. A construction loan will be issued for $54.9 million, and then the balance will be transferred to a 4-year term note after construction ends. Construction started just as soon as the engineering plans were completed and the permits pulled. During the construction phase, a second company was established to operate and manage the mine. Its ownership team will be the same as the first. However, the second company holds little or no assets and isolates the risk of the mine at the operational level. All generated profits will flow upstream to the holding company via a lease agreement. In this example, we calculated the lease to be about $3 million a month. Yes, you will be leasing to yourself, and you will sign the lease agreement twice, once as a lessee and once as a lessor. But who's to say what is the proper lease amount for a unique coal mine with 4.5 million ton of met coal? Remember, keeping cash on hand will not be a problem with the $15 million sitting in reserve from the private equity firm. This means you move the generated profits once a month upstream and to safe harbor just as quickly as they become available. Now you're going to have to make a decision about signing an agreement with the union or operate as a merit shop. The local BA with the United Mine Workers of America has already been out to the construction job site and mentioned the non-union construction trades. There are pros and cons regardless to your decision, but it's your mine and it's one more decision you're going to have to make. After a long, hard-fought year, the construction phase is wrapping up, the prep plan is being commissioned, Some coal is being worked out of the ground and used for testing purposes. All in all, it's beginning to look like an active coal mine. A few months later, the last gang box leaves the job site and production begins. The construction loan is converted to a 4-year note, and within weeks, the first train of 100 empty cars will arrive to be loaded. Now starts the repetitive grind of safety checks and procedures, drilling, blasting, loading, hauling, roof supports, ventilation management, maintenance repairs, crushing, screening, washing, dewatering, blending, stockpiling, storage, and loading trains. Hopefully these tasks will be repeated at the production rate that meets the ticking clock schedule of the bank loans and the private equity agreement. For the next 6 years, you will send friends, co-workers, and family members into the earth to claw out what nature has purposely buried. Yes, they know the risk, and the pay is good, but you also know that the majority of the proceeds will flow directly out of the community and straight to some of the richest people on earth. These people will never remove one speck of coal dust from under their fingernails, or share a glass of sweet tea with some of the greatest people you will ever meet, or lay awake at night hoping that all is safe in the mine. You go to sleep that night thinking that if all goes well, maybe you could build that baseball diamond for the local kids that have been needing it for a long time. After 4 years of running coal, the bank is paid off, and like the construction team, they fade from the project. Another year comes and goes without too much disruption. Oh sure, MSHA comes calling, but they always do, and on occasion they feel obligated to justify their existence. The legal folks are dealing with these fines and working on settlements. During the negotiations, it doesn't hurt that the financial reports indicate that the mine is working on tight margins. The coal slurry impoundment seems to have enough capacity. In fact, the plant engineer was checking his numbers to make sure you can make it to the end of next year. He thought the level should be a little higher based on the coal produced, but that's a good thing, isn't it? The Coal Festival happens every year in June, and you were invited to be a guest speaker. You said a few words and thanked your employees, but you knew that you were just a few months away from the end of the private equity agreement. In July, your plant engineer mentioned that bubbles had been seen down in the coal slurry impoundment. No excess water had been found in the mine. Hopefully it's just gasification. And then in October, 2 months away from Christmas, you arrive at the end of your 7-year agreement with the private equity firm. Over the years, $216 million had floated up to the holding company via the lease agreement. $65.5 million had been paid to the bank, $135.4 million paid to the limited partners. They were happy and was asking if you had eyes on another project. In reality, you and the general partner hadn't done too bad yourselves. You had received a weekly paycheck for running the mine, and both of you had received $7.5 million over the life of the project. The question now was what to do with the mine and the equipment, the $46.7 million on hand, and the almost $30 million that was set aside for environmental issues and mine restoration. Do you mine it out, mothball it, bankrupt it, or sell it? The general partner really didn't care. He had absolutely no emotional attachment to the project. All he wanted was for the remaining assets to be harvested and divided as promised. To shorten this example, we'll tell you what decisions were made. The cash assets were stripped and divided between you and the private equity firm, and you were given free rein to do with the mine as you wished. Not wanting to see your men laid off right before Christmas, you sold the mine for $1, as is, with all assets and past and future liabilities, including restoration. You even left $10 million in the general account to sweeten the pot. On the way out, you told the mine owner about the bubbles in the slurry impoundment, watched a new sign with the new name being erected, signed the contract for the new baseball park with the local high school, and went home to sleep easy for the first time in 7 years. For now, you feel blessed. You got up from the table before fate took its toll. You did a good job. No labor disputes, no gassy mines, no severe injury or death, minor MSHA, legal, and EPA issues, but deep down you know you're lucky. And if you keep playing this game, a day of reckoning will come. You went to sleep that night thinking about what it would be like to run 7 or 8 of these projects at the same time.
30 yards in that bucket.
Financial strategies like those used in the previous example brought 3 Appalachia coal executives to power in the 1980s. Jeff Hoops joined the engineering department of Consol Energy straight out of high school in 1975. Ben Hatfield joined A.T. Massey in 1979, and Don Blankenship joined A.T. Massey as an accountant in 1982. Each would come to have direct ties to the financial markets of Wall Street and New York City. Over time, they would become the face of an industry that their communities in the nation either loved or hated and argued if it was good or evil. They stood in the servitude of some of the richest and most powerful people on earth, and they were surrounded by greed, politics, and corruption. And yes, they stood daily before nature and begged for her mercy. Now, I do not believe that these 3 men entered the industry knowing the stage on which they would stand, or the environmental impact that would occur, and or the men that would die on their watch. None of the 3 got out unscathed. Ben's violent death still has a shroud of mystery cloaking the events. Jeff Hoop's legacy is marred by the Black Jewel bankruptcy, and Don Blankenship spent time in prison and still deals with a negative persona that was enhanced and cast by long-term rivals. Their stories are complex and intermingled and has a Shakespearean tragedy feel to it, and the opening act starts in the 1980s in the Money District of New York City. In upcoming episodes, we will use the lives of these 3 individuals to dig deeper into details in the history of coal country. The environmental cost is extreme and as relevant today as yesterday. Lives have been destroyed, injured, and lost. And as stated, the players directly involved are the richest and most powerful people on earth. We do hope that you join us as we move to the streets of New York and examine how the mob's concrete club, Trump Tower and Plaza, Rudy Giuliani, and coal country are connected. Now, I do not know that if the changes to the definition of the waters of the Commonwealth is going to radically change the amount of pollutants that are going into our streams. Truth of the matter is those pollutants have been going into our streams for many generations. In Martin County, they haven't had clean drinking water for 3 generations. So those pollutants are already coming into the stream, regardless to what the definition was in this bill. But what I do know is that the authority having jurisdiction has been limited due to this definition. Now, the coal companies, they've figured out how to use business organizations and structures to be able to limit their risk associated with EPA fines, either from the federal government or from Kentucky. They figured out ways to bankrupt out from underneath, needing to put the cost out for reclamation of these mines. And so they've been doing this long before SB89 hit the governor's desk. And I do hope that you found it informative. And I would like to thank you once again for joining us for another episode of FishingLocalWaters.com.